In Shaanxi's Sizhou, there was a chivalrous hero named Xingdi. He was skilled in pulling a strong bow and shooting a string of arrows, earning him the reputation of having unparalleled archery skills. However, throughout his life, he suffered setbacks and misfortune. He had poor luck and was not adept at managing or profiting from business ventures. Every time he engaged in trade, he ended up losing money. Nevertheless, wealthy merchants from both the northern and southern capitals always liked to accompany him, feeling safer on the road with him by their side. In early winter, a couple of merchants lent Xingdi some money and invited him to join them in transporting goods. Xingdi also contributed all the money he had, intending to make a substantial transaction. He had a friend skilled in fortune-telling, so he consulted him about the auspiciousness of the venture. The friend cast a divination and said, "This divination shows the hexagram of Hui repentance. Not only will your business this time not yield profits, but you may also end up suffering losses." Displeased by this prediction, Xingdi considered dropping the venture. However, the merchants forcefully dragged him along and rushed onto the road. When they reached the capital, the outcome was exactly as predicted. They lost their initial investments. In mid-December, Xingdi left the city alone on horseback, realizing that he would be penniless the following year, which further deepened his sense of melancholy. At this moment, amidst the misty morning fog, Xingdi entered a roadside inn to rest and find some wine to drink. He spotted an elderly man with white hair and two young men seated together at a table near the northern window, while a servant boy with bushy blonde hair attended to them. Xingdi sat down facing the elderly man on the southern side, while the servant boy poured wine for the elderly man and his companions. He accidentally knocked over a dish, splattering the old man's clothes. One of the young men grew angry and immediately grabbed the servant boy's ear, then used a handkerchief to wipe the old man's clothes. At that moment, Xingdi noticed that the servant boy had a half-inch thick iron ring around his thumb, and each iron ring weighed about 2 liang. After the meal, the old man instructed one of the young men to take out some silver coins from his leather pouch and place them on the table. He counted and weighed the silver coins, and it took him the time it would take to drink several cups of wine before he wrapped the silver coins back up. The young man led out a limping black mule from the animal shed, helped the old man mount, and the servant boy mounted a skinny horse beside them. The two young men carried bows and arrows at their waists and led the horses out of the inn. Xingdi observed that the old man had a considerable amount of silver, and he became envious to the point of almost bursting into flames. He gave up the idea of drinking wine and quickly followed behind. Seeing that the old man and the servant boy were slowly walking ahead, Xingdi left the main road and took a shortcut to cut in front of the old man. He confronted the old man with an imposing manner, blocking the horse's path, and drew his bow to shoot. The old man bent over, took off his left boot, and said with a smile, "Don't you recognize old Gourmand?" Xingdi pulled the bowstring taut and shot an arrow. The old man reclined in the saddle, extending his foot and using his two toes like a pair of pliers to catch the flying arrow. He laughed and said, "Is this all the skill you have? Do I need to use my hands to deal with someone like you?" Enraged, Xingdi employed his unique technique, releasing one arrow after another in rapid succession. The old man caught one arrow with his hand, seemingly unguarded against Xingdi's string of arrows. The second arrow shot straight into the old man's mouth. The old man fell off his horse, the arrow sticking out from his mouth as he lay still. The servant boy jumped off his horse. Xingdi was elated, thinking that the old man was dead. As he approached, the old man spat out the arrow and stood up, clapping his hands and saying, "Meeting for the first time, and you're playing such a prank." Startled, Xingdi realized he was dealing with an extraordinary person. His horse was frightened and galloped away. Xingdi then understood that he shouldn't mess with the old man. After traveling for about 30 or 40 li, Xingdi encountered a government escort carrying valuables to the capital. He intercepted and robbed them of about 1,000 liang in silver. Now, Xingdi finally felt content. As he rode away triumphantly, he heard the sound of galloping hooves behind him. Turning round, he saw the servant boy riding the old man's limping mule, rushing towards him and shouting, "Stop, man! You took things that belong to me. You should share some of your loot." Xingdi said, "Do you recognize Xingdi of the string of arrows?" The servant boy replied, "I already learned my lesson earlier." Assuming that the servant boy was nondescript and lacked a bow and arrows, making him easy to handle, Xingdi shot 3 arrows in succession, a continuous assault like a flock of eagles. However, the servant boy remained composed, catching 2 arrows with his hand and holding another arrow in his mouth. He chuckled and said, "This kind of skill is truly embarrassing. My master rushed here in haste and didn't have time to fetch his bow. This arrow is useless to him, so I'll give it back to you." Saying this, he removed the iron ring from his thumb, threaded the arrow through it, and with a swift toss, it made a whizzing sound as it flew away. Xingdi hastily used his bow to deflect the arrow, but the bowstring struck the iron ring, producing a loud snap as the bow shattered. Terrified, Xingdi didn't have time to dodge, and the arrow passed through his ear. Unintentionally, he fell off his horse. The servant boy dismounted and attempted to collect the silver coins. Xingdi lay on the ground, raising his bow to strike the servant boy. The servant boy snatched the bow away and snapped it in 2, then broke it in 2 for pieces and tossed them aside. Next, with one hand gripping Xingdi's arm and one foot pressing down on his legs, the servant boy rendered Xingdi immobilized. It felt as though Xingdi's arms were bound and his legs were pinned. And despite exerting all his strength, he couldn't budge an inch. The servant boy unwound the 2 3-finger-wide straps around Xingdi's waist, and with a single pinch, the straps snapped like ashes. The servant boy took the silver, leaped onto the limping mule, raised his hand, and said, "I apologize." Then he swiftly departed. Returning home, Xingdi transformed into a law-abiding and virtuous man. He often recounted these events to others without concealing anything. This story has many similarities with the tale of Liu Dongshan.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.